Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second episode of the SFL Update this off-season. I'm your Commissioner Cameron Irvine, and tonight we have a lot to break down, and we're actually going to give you a special treat tonight. We're going to go through the updated rulebook section by section. So just in case you haven't read over it in a while, just in case you are unfamiliar with specific parts of how the SFL operates, you'll be able to look through all of that tonight as we go through piece by piece and explain some of the new things that were voted in after owners' meetings are now officially concluded, and and some of the rules and nuances of the league that are some of the most important. We'll also break down what's going to happen next week a little bit, and give some more in-depth detail on that. And we're also going to let you guys see a revised off-season schedule. Good news for undrafted rookies as part of that revised off-season schedule. So we're going to get right into it. This isn't going to be our most exciting show. We know that coming in, but it's an educational show, an important show for so many of our new players, so many of our new coaches and owners to really see how the SFL ticks and how the SFL operates and what we all do behind the scenes to make it an organized success. And so sometimes it's important to just sit down, take a look at the book, refresh your memory before starting really, really starting a new season, starting next week when contracts are begin to be negotiated. So we're going to jump right into it here. Now, a lot of this stuff will be familiar to most people, but things have been hashed out, and we just want to go through it one by one. So we'll start with Section 1, which is the general rules in the 1.1 unfair play category. If owners, coaches know of any APF 2K AI glitches, which includes plays that are not called by the CPU, abilities that have previously been deemed an unfair advantage or do not add any advantage with proof if necessary, or any other exploit due to the game's build out of the box which can be avoided in CPU versus CPU play, including specific plays or formations, they must be brought to the league's attention immediately so adjustments can be made. Knowing of this broken AI and not coming forward with that knowledge will be labeled as an unjust practice against which the league will take action. Examples of forbidden play, if you didn't know, any trick play is not called, halfback pass, flea flicker, tight end, Z spread has also been found to cause bugs in the defense. Plays may be added to this list at the discretion of the commissioner after we have some proof of testing that the play is in fact broken. It is the responsibility of ownership and the duty of owners to present these flaws and to uphold the integrity of the SFL operation. It is the responsibility of owners to protect the league's brand as they are primarily responsible for the product being displayed on the field. Unjust practices in the SFL will be strictly labeled as illegal if an organization is involved in unjust practices. And if a member of that organization is found by review of the commissioner to have prior knowledge of these unfair practices without reporting them, a lifetime ban will be passed down from the commissioner at his discretion for unfair practices. Owners can overturn any potential lifetime ban by at least 4/5 majority vote, which currently is 13-3. 1.2 impersonal conduct or interpersonal conduct. Owners are expected to treat the commissioner, each other, and all fans and user players with courtesy and respect. We always have to remind people of this. This encompasses everything from common courtesy to mutual respect and mutual respect for other owners during off-season discussions, to a similar approach in the Twitch chat room and on Slack, I should say, to act in good faith with user players during the off-season. This rule does not forbid displays of emotion or frustration or any competitive banter in chat during games. Acting in good faith towards agents includes, for example, not making an offer to players without any user intention of signing them, not trying to trade a free agent without their knowledge or consent during the regular season, and so on. Practices determined to violate these principles will be addressed at my discretion. Owners can overturn by 4/5 majority vote. 1.3 game integrity. Owners and coaches must make a good faith effort to compete and win throughout the season, regardless of the team's playoff prospects or an owner's happiness or unhappiness with his team's performance in a given season. Owners are ultimately responsible for the conduct of their coaches and have a responsibility to remove coaches whose conduct is detrimental to the league. Practices determined to violate these principles will be addressed. At my discretion, owners can overturn any potential lifetime ban imposed. 13-3. So that's all of the technical stuff. Let's head to Section 2, which is the roster rules. This is new for the season. The salary cap, which was $100 million last year, and let's further explain. Last year you had 12 contracts. The total value of those contracts over the life of those contracts was put into your salary cap. So if you had a 3-year $15 million deal, all $15 million was included in that $100 million salary cap. This year we've adjusted it. The salary cap is now $60 million per season, and the salary cap is now determined based on the salary paid per season rather than being determined by the total value of the contracts. That means that contract amounts relate to the salary cap the same way they do in the NFL, except that players receive a constant amount every season. So, for example, you can't have a contract where you have $4 million one season, $5 million the next, $6 million the next. It's $5 million every season, although there is an exception to that. We'll get to that in a little while. Every current contract will convert to this scheme starting in the offseason before summer 2016. The value of any contract can be determined using the chart in the 2.3 contract length section, which we will get to shortly. So there's a minor adjustment. It was posted on Slack, or it was posted actually within the owner's survey. The difference between the old salary cap and what each contract cost a team per season, and the new contract structure within the salary cap. So there's a slight modification there, few percentage points of the percentage it counts towards cap, but really not a huge difference. So in this next off-season period, when teams decide to sign players, we'll work out those details in terms of how those contracts may be adjusted, or if a team were to keep a player that they had from last season, whether they're under contract or whether they're resigning them, we'll work out the details of what that contract should actually be costing that team. Every team must sign 3 golds, 4 silvers, and 5 bronzes to their lineup. Nothing new there. You can see the examples. I'm not going to read through the examples, but they stay on the screen long enough to where you're able to get the gist of those examples. 2.2 abilities section. Ability costs change by tier. Gold abilities cost the most. Bronze abilities cost the least. Gold abilities cost $3 million each. Silver $2 million. Bronze $500,000. A bronze player with no abilities still costs $500,000. Ability maximums and minimums by tier. This is new. Bronze players can now have a maximum of 4 abilities. And really that was passed because bronze players often are players at positions that maybe aren't of extreme value to the team. But if you want a player to have an extreme impact, or not an extreme impact, but a marginal impact, and you wanted to create like an extreme pass rusher at defensive end with 4 abilities, that would be a really good bronze pass rusher. So you could load attributes in the way that would be beneficial to having sort of that specialized weapon out there as a bronze player. That you may not otherwise spend the time or the resources on if he was at the silver or gold level. Silvers can have 1 to 3 abilities, golds can have 2 to 5. That is the same as it's been. So something new also, retention incentives. And we have a chart here. A user player who opts out of his current contract may only be given 3 abilities with his new team as a gold, 2 abilities as a silver, and 1 ability as a bronze. Opting out is discussed in more detail in the 4.4 opt-out section. So you can see rookies what your max contract could be depending upon the tier that you are signed at, um, and players opting out. And the reason why we say or why we put that in for player opt-outs, and by we I mean the owners who voted that in this past week, is we want teams and players to honor their commitments. With this said, teams can also be punished for trying to push a player out too early before their deal, etc. So it's a tit for tat, whoever's to blame type situation. But if a player signs a certain deal for a certain amount of seasons, they should stick with that team, and they should try to help that team be a success to the best of their abilities, and just taking the easy way out and opting out and deciding to go elsewhere is something that really isn't necessarily encouraged because this isn't this is a realistic league. Teams are going to be hesitant to sign a player who just simply opts out of deals when the going gets tough, because they want to be able to rely on that player too. Not to say that there's not situations where a player deservedly should opt out if they have a gold market value season and a team doesn't want to bump their contract up or can't bump their contract up. A player has every right to look for other opportunities. But that was the ability maximums for the first season, and the ability maximums for rookies are there. You can see that the ability maximums increase for when rookies are no longer rookies anymore, and when players, after they've opted out, or if they've never opted out before, in good standing, have the ability to have more abilities in their respective tiers. So we'll get into those nuances as we go along. The contract length, 2.3, this is still the same. Gold players may sign for 3 or 4 seasons. Silver players may sign for 2 or 3 seasons. And bronze players may sign for 1 or 2 seasons. There's nothing new in 2.3. However, this is new. This is the current structure of what each player costs to the cap. The following is an outline of all potential contract lengths and amounts. So a 5 ability gold will cost you $15 million per season. That's 25% of your allotted salary cap that one player costs to have a max player out there on the field. Johnny English, I believe, is one of them, but there's not too many in the SFL because they cost a pretty penny. But those are the contract structures. You can see that a 3 ability silver costs the same as a 2 ability gold, even though the 2 ability gold is actually more talented. A 4 ability bronze costs more than a 1 ability silver. The silver is still more talented, but these are in the special cases. If you want a great bronze crew, if you want a great silver crew to complement your players at a higher tier, everyone has the ability to do that. So when players sign deals, whether they are already under contract or whether they sign new contracts this offseason, this salary structure is how contracts will be measured against the cap. So if you currently have a 3 ability silver on your roster, for however many years you have them signed for, that's the amount they're going to cost to your cap this year. So you can just you can take a look at that there. 2.4, section 2.4 is market value. And this is still all the same. Market value is the player's voice. It's what the player feels the price of his value is based on his performance from the previous season. Players use market value to make all of their off-season contract decisions. At the end of each season, a player's market value will be determined by the commissioner to be either gold, silver, or bronze based on the player's performance from the previous season. Gold market value players may be offered a gold or silver contract. Silver market value players may be offered any contract, and bronze market value players may be offered a silver or bronze contract. A rookie player may be drafted at any tier level within the confines of the draft and the free agency process. These rules are outlined further down in the 4.6 draft section, and you can see the grid there. This rule book, by the way, put together by the board of directors, did a fantastic job in doing so. So now here's where we get to the nitty-gritty, because this is Section 3, off-season rules, and we first sort of define what some of these off-season rules and procedures consist of. So what's the difference between a user player and a non-user player? A user player is a player based on a real-life user who has been either drafted or added as an initial team member on an expansion team, or just in the rookie draft. A user must be active. Players considered inactive by the commissioner are treated as non-user players for the purposes of contract renegotiations. A non-user player is a player who is not represented by a real-life user. How about cuts? How do cuts work? Section 3.2. Teams may not cut players during the regular season. However, they may cut players at any point during the offseason. That starts tomorrow. When a team cuts a player, they are responsible for half of his remaining salary if they are still under contract. This counts against their salary cap amount. A user player opting out of a contract is not considered a cut. This process is described in more detail in the 4.6 opt-outs section. For more information on the cut period, which is new to the SFL, see 4.8, and we'll get to that in a little while. So how about a free agent who is market determined retired? A player who goes a full off-season without being signed to an active roster is considered to be retired. This player can be brought out of retirement only if a team forfeits or uses a rookie draft pick to do so. A player who is retired for 2 consecutive off seasons is considered permanently retired and may no longer be brought out of retirement. Retired players eligible to be brought out of retirement may be offered a contract as dictated by their last calculated market value. Now, there's also another way for a player to retire. That's Section 3.4, the veteran retirement. Once at the end of each season, an owner may designate a player who is either currently under contract for the next season or seasons, or whose contract is ending as retired if this player has completed 6 or more seasons in the league. Now that goes for non-users. The same can be said for a user player to retire at their own discretion. The above retirement is permanent. No other team can bring this player out of retirement. If the player still has seasons left on his contract, his team is responsible for paying half of his remaining salary. Section 3.5, trades. This has gotten a lot more in-depth since the BOD was reviewing our rule book, so we'll go through it step by step of how players can be traded in the SFL. Teams may not trade players during the regular season. However, they may trade players at any point during the offseason. Players may be traded for other players or for picks, but not for cash. All trades are subject to review by me and I must approve them. Trades do not have to be player for player, but they must be deemed fair and realistic. And I have the right to reject any trade that seems unfair or force alteration of the terms of the trade to make them fairer. Golds cannot be traded for bronzes. Bronzes cannot be traded for golds. It is ruled as an unfair trade, unless that trade involves players moving up or down to the silver level. This is not the only constituent of an unfair trade, but it is one example of what would always be deemed unfair. So to that point, when executing a trade, teams have the option of raising or lowering the tier of the player 1-star level. If the player remains at the same level, he keeps his current contract and number of abilities exactly as if he were on his former team. This means they can upgrade the player as if he had been on their team for a season already, which is outlined in the 4.3 upgrading players section, which we'll get to in a little bit. If a team wishes to change a player's tier, this is considered a contract renegotiation. The player then signs a new contract with that team. So through all of this, keep in mind that market value drives new contracts. So anytime a player is to sign a new contract, it goes back to market value. If you're a bronze market value, you cannot sign a gold contract when you possess the bronze market value, and vice versa. You can't sign a bronze deal if you possess the gold market value, because it would be unrealistic to have a player who didn't perform at his highest sign a ridiculous deal, and for a player who played extremely well to take that big of a massive pay cut. It should be worth noting that the upgrading players section is new when we get to it. More on the trades. User players may not be traded without their consent. If a user player were traded without his consent early in free agency, he could just opt out of the deal. If he were traded without his consent later in free agency, the negotiations with that player would not have been in good faith, since the team would have only signed him in order to trade him later. Thus, consent must be given. Such agents who give consent to a trade may not opt out of their contract during the same offseason. So, if they consent to a trade, they are traded to another team, they're on that team. They can't opt out from that point. Players with expiring contracts may not be traded at any time during the offseason unless they are re-signed. A player with an expiring contract must be either re-signed, and forgive us, franchised should not be in the book here because that did not pass. Either re-signed or released into to free agency. A team may not, for example, trade the rights of an expiring player to another team in exchange for a draft pick, such that the player's new team has the right to negotiate a deal with the player without them ever hitting free agency. So trades are complicated and complex. If you're never a part of a trade, you'll never have to know Section 3.5. If you are, that's the section that you'll want to make yourself familiar with. Now, another part of the offseason is player position changes. Players are only able to change positions if they fit the proper specs of football, height, and weight using the scale found here. And that scale is available on our website. Major position changes include wide receiver to halfback and vice versa, wide receiver to tight end, fullback to tight end, cornerback to safety, and outside linebacker to defensive end, all vice versa. Minor position changes are defined as lateral moves, strong to free safety, inside to outside linebacker, defensive end to defensive tackle, running back to fullback, etc. Major position changes can only occur at the beginning of a contract. Minor position changes can occur during any offseason, regardless of contract status. So those are some definitions of some of the off-season events or off-season procedures, if you will. Now we actually get to the off-season events and we break down how the off-season works from start to finish. First, we determine market value. We've already done that this off-season. You can find the market values of all players in the off-season business section of Slack. Then we go to the restricted negotiating period. That is what is coming up starting tomorrow. In that period, you will renegotiate expired contracts. You will upgrade or re-sign any players, and user players have the option to opt out. We'll follow that up with user players free agency. So any user players that didn't sign a new deal or opted out of their current team deals will be a part of that user free agency period. Then we'll have the rookie draft. Then we'll have contract and player finalizations within those finalizations, amnesty cuts, which is new to this season, ability changes, and player specs, finalized contract values. Then finally, we'll have non-user players free agency, and we'll discuss each of these events. So 4.2, renegotiating expired contracts. Teams will have the chance to re-sign their own players with expiring contracts before these players hit free agency. At this point, user players and non-user players will have a slightly different procedure. This is new, so take a heads up here, as you'll want to listen to this even if you are a new owner, just to make sure that you have, or an old owner, just to make sure you have everything clear. Some is the same, but the differential between non-user and user players is what's important here. So non-user players with expiring contracts will automatically accept a contract extension offer if the offered tier of the contract matches their market value. That is the same as it's been. For example, a gold market value player will automatically accept an offer from his current team to extend him as a gold player. If a team chooses not to offer a player an extension at the level matching his tier, that player will become a free agent. The team may sign him later, but they will be competing with other teams during free agency and trying to do so. It's also worth noting you can offer one tier higher to a player, and they will automatically accept. Now, all you user players out there with expiring contracts have a choice to either accept or reject any contract offer, even if the offer matches the tier of your market value. For example, if a team offers a quarterback with a gold market value, a gold tier contract, that player may still reject the contract if he wants to try his hand in free agency or move to a different team. It should be worth noting, user players, that if your contract has expired and you don't re-sign with your team, you're not subject to those ability restrictions as you would be if you opted out of a deal that wasn't finished yet. Just want to clarify. Teams may offer any of their players currently under contract a new contract at a higher tier. That is brand new this year. So anybody right now that is on your team, you are able to offer them a higher contract and basically redo their contract and make that player better if you have the cap space and if you have the spot in the 3, 4, 5 tier ladder to put that player. But now any off season, he could have 3 years, 2 years, 1 year left, or what I should say 3 seasons, 2 seasons, 1 season left on his deal, and you could sign him up and get them a new contract and not have to worry about them into free agency. So here's how that works in relation to non-user and user players. A non-user player will accept this new offer and begin a new contract. A user player can choose to accept or reject the contract offer. This is a new contract, and any changes that would normally occur at that time, like allowed position changes, are prohibited. Since he is remaining with his current team, his number of max abilities would not reset. There's no player opt-out or anything like that. We'll break it down in a little bit more of an easy FAQ here in a moment, because this is one of the more radical changes that owners decided to approve over the owner meeting period. Now, so we just talked about teams may offer any of their players currently under contract at a new contract at a higher tier. Teams may designate a player currently under contract to play the remainder of his contract at a lower tier now as well. However, they must still honor the value amount of the original contract. The player may not have more abilities than allowed by his new tier. This cannot be done to a user player without his consent. For example, a team could designate a 4-ability gold halfback to play the remainder of his contract at the silver level. They would still have to pay the value of his original contract, which was $12 million per season, and they would have to reduce his number of abilities to 3, the maximum allowed to a silver player. So this could be done if you just want to decrease this player's role, if you want to create space at the top for a new rookie, a new gold rookie. Maybe you bring in a rookie with just a few or a couple gold abilities and then raise their contract later once that heavy contract has expired that you just moved down to silver. It just gives everyone an opportunity to further adjust and be flexible with their contracts. So we'll continue. 4.3, upgrading players. Again, this is also a new section of the rulebook. As outlined in the retention incentives portion of 2.2, players are limited in the number of abilities they can have during their rookie season. In the off-season, following their rookie season, a team may decide to upgrade them to the maximum number of allowable abilities for their position. This must be done following the player's rookie season. The amount of seasons on the contract cannot change, and the per season amount of the contract must increase to accommodate the player's new number of abilities. We also should point out that this can also be done to any other player under contract. So it doesn't necessarily have to be immediately after a rookie season. It can be any player in any offseason if you want to increase their abilities, if you want to raise the profile of that player for the remainder of their deal, you have the ability to do so, which you've never had the ability to do before. This is not considered a renegotiation of the player's contract. It is a regular, built-in part of every contract which teams may utilize or ignore as they see fit. So this is not a new deal. This is just, um, we'll get to the example here down low. There's no way to reduce a player's abilities if he is retained at the same tier until his contract expires and the team renegotiates with him. So as we said, an example, 4 ability, gold halfback. He's currently signed at 4 seasons, 12 million per. In the following offseason, the team may upgrade him to 5. The running back's contract for the following season would be 15 million per season for 3 seasons remaining on the deal. The team may not reduce the running back's number of abilities in the upcoming seasons unless they reduce his tier, as already mentioned. Reducing tiers is outlined in the section above. So again, here's the table that you saw earlier with the cost of abilities, the minimum number of abilities at each tier, the ability maxes for rookies, for players who have opted out of contracts, and for the majority of the population, which would be ability maximums for non-rookies and players in good standing with their former contract or current contract. So 4.4 is the opt-out section. And this is relatively new because of the user-player dynamic. A user-player may opt out of his contract at the end of any season, no matter how much time is left on his contract. His former team is not responsible for any of his remaining salary, unlike what would happen if they cut him, where they would be responsible for half. A player who opts out of his current deal becomes a free agent and may not resign with his former team during this offseason. A player who opts out of his current deal is subject to strict ability limits during his first season, as we've highlighted, with the team he signs with. The second season he is with his new team, his maximum number of abilities can increase. A player who opts out of his second deal, so if you opt out once and then you opt out again and you're a user player. Now this doesn't mean, oh, well, I'll just retire and make another player and I'll opt out and I'll retire and I'll make another player and I'll opt out. No, this is of the same user. If a user has multiple players and they opt out of more than one deal, once a user player, once a person that is controlling a player opts out of the second deal, they cannot sign as a gold, regardless of market value. After playing out the silver or bronze, he becomes a regular free agent and can sign the type of contract any other free agent could sign. That is, tier limited by market value, abilities limited, his first season with the team, but 2-4 is a gold, not 3, etc. So, again, jumping around, not committing, and not being a team player is pretty frowned upon around here. And owners want to make sure that players understand that, and owners also understand that as well. They want to give you opportunity. They want you to help build their franchise with you, and you can't do that if you're constantly jumping from ship to ship. If you don't get along with somebody, that's one thing. If you have opportunities elsewhere to pursue that that just can't be passed down, that's another. But otherwise, it's, we want to keep things consistent. So, also new to the rule book, teams will be compensated for players who opt out with a position-protected draft pick. This will allow the team who has lost the player, if in fact the player is found at fault for the split up in the middle of a contract, to draft a replacement at the same position and with the same number of abilities the player had, regardless of who already has been drafted. For more information, we'll get to the draft here in a little bit. So you can see the example there. If a 5 ability gold opt-outs, that's a huge crater that's been left. A team could take a 5 ability gold in the draft, regardless of where they draft that person, to sort of counter for the difference in a player just upping and leaving a team, so that the team doesn't have to suffer for a player, leaving town, so to speak. We want to encourage owners to draft user players. We want user players to be a part of this community, and we don't want them to be a burden on teams or a risk for teams to invest in. We want user players to be looked at as the more attractive option. So with all that said, all of that we have now covered, everything that we've covered in the last 20 minutes or so relates to what can happen next week. So I wanted to dumb it down a little bit and do an FAQ on what do I do next week. And these are all the options that you have to choose from when working with players, user players, and your own players that aren't controlled by users. These are the powers that you have under the new rules. So the first question is, I have a non-user player whose contract has expired. What are my options? The answer is you can re-sign the player at his market value, or you can sign him one level higher. If you don't re-sign him, the player will be declared a free agent, eligible in non-user free agency in June. Another situation, I have a non-user player whose contract has not expired. What are my options? Well, you can sign the player to a new deal at its market value or one tier higher. You can also sign the player to one tier lower, but you are still responsible for the player's salary. You can also add abilities to the remainder of his contract. These decisions must be finalized by June 4th. And actually, my apologies. There is a typo there. You can sign the player to a new deal one tier higher. You wouldn't sign him to a new deal at his market value. You would just increase his abilities. Although we'll have to double check that afterwards in the rule book. We'll have to look into that a little bit more. And forgive me because I'm getting used to all of these rules as well. So my apologies. I don't mean to confuse anybody. So the next situation, I have a user player whose contract has expired. What are my options? Well, you must negotiate a new deal at or one tier higher or lower than market value with the user player, or the user player will declare for free agency. The other situation you may find yourself in this week, I have a user player whose contract has not expired. What are my options? Well, you can sign the player to a new deal at his market value or one tier higher, and actually, I do believe that's correct. You can either extend his current deal by adding abilities, or you can just sign the player to a longer term contract. Either one is fine. You can also sign the player to one tier lower, but you were responsible for the player's salary. For a user player, you must gain player consent to do that. You can also add abilities to the remainder of his contract. All decisions of everything above must be finalized or all decisions with a user player whose contract has or has not expired it must be finalized by May 8th before user free agency begins. So now we get to section 4.5, and that's user players free agency. Teams may offer one contract per day in free agency, and we went over this stuff a bit last week. Contracts to a user free agent will contain the following: proposed tier, proposed number of abilities, and a short pitch statement with a max of 150 words. Contracts will be emailed to the commissioner or to someone he has designated for this purpose. It will be me, not to the free agent directly. The commissioner will send each user free agent any contract offers he may have received on a given day. And I have talked about this briefly on Slack. User players do not have to negotiate with me. I am just extending the hand that this is an official offer from a team. You're more than welcome to talk to anybody that you want, but the official offer from the team, you can't sign a deal without an official offer from the team, and free agents will get one a day max. Well, I should say teams have one a day max to give out. User players may get multiple contracts a day depending upon their popularity. Teams are not to contact free agents outside of this procedure in order to pursue them further. This is done on the honor system. So once you have extended the offer to the player must reach out to the team. Teams can reach out and start doing their own spiel, but doing that before officially offering a player is frowned upon. You're sort of letting a player know that they're a priority, but you haven't made them a priority yet because you haven't given them an official offer. Obviously, a team that gives an offer to a user free agent on the first day, you're their top priority. You're somebody that they want to get, more than anyone else. And so user players should look at, as the days go on in free agency, as they should look at that as an honor to get a contract on day one, for that team to have done that. They really want you. And once they have extended their hand and put in that offer, you are more than welcome to have official discussions about a future contract. And so that's how that process will work. So it's all based on the honor system. Just understand, players and owners, that until your official arm is extended out to a player, it's best to be courteous and let the process work itself out and not try to contact that player prematurely. Free agents will report to the commissioner which contract they offer or they wish to accept by the end of user players free agency week. That's in a couple of weeks. And that date has already been set. We'll get to the revised off-season calendar in a moment. I will reveal the signings of user player free agents during a special broadcast. Logical roster maximums will be considered in the case that a team offers a contract to more than one player at the same position. So if two corners are offered, whichever contract was offered by the team first, if both players accept, for example, then that first contract will be honored and the second one will be taken off the table. User players who fail to accept a contract during this period by choice, they are still active, will enter the free agency pool of fictional players, of non-user players. They can be picked up to fill any holes a team may or may not have. If they are deemed inactive, their player will be treated as a non-user free agent and relegated to the 4.10 non-user players free agency period. This will be done at my discretion. It should be worth noting that there is a new rule on the table that we have not gotten to, that we will get to on the very last part of this show. You do not want to miss that revised off-season schedule and that new rule that was put in by me and approved by the BOD, or by most of the BOD. Hasn't been officially confirmed, but because it's a new revelation, but we're putting it in the calendar and it's getting done. So that's coming later. Make sure that you don't tune out for that, or miss that, I should say. So now we've had contract negotiations, we've had a user free agency, now we have the rookie draft. So at this point in the season, all user players that were on teams from last year, they should all have homes. They should all have contracts. They should all be signed, sealed, and delivered. So on to the rookie draft, 4.6. The draft will occur the week after the 4.5 user players free agency decisions are announced. Each owner's or a designated representative, which could be myself, will make picks for the teams live during a special broadcast. That broadcast is May 30th. The draft will operate similar to how it has in the past. The draft is composed of as many rounds as mandated by the player pool. This includes a supplemental draft period at the end for teams that are granted compensatory picks. So, for example, and that's a little foggy. If you got a supplemental pick because a player opted out, a user player opted out of their contract, and you're trying to get a player to put in their place, you do that within the first couple of rounds of the draft. You can either use one of your picks as a composite compensatory pick, or you can not. Draft order is determined by team record during the previous season and is determined league-wide, not by conference, which means that the teams with the top 2 draft picks will be the teams with the 2 worst records, even if they were in the same conference. Each team will draft a player at a position. Once a position is drafted twice during a round, no other team may draft a gold or silver player at that position for the remainder of that round. To elaborate on the above rule, the position limitation per round does not apply to bronze players, who may be drafted at any position and in any round, regardless of who has already been drafted. Registered user players may be drafted at any tier, and in their contract they may receive a maximum of 4 abilities for a gold, 2 for a silver, and 1 for a bronze. If a player resigns or remains with his team following his rookie season, during the renegotiating expired contracts period, he is eligible for an extra ability if his team offers to him. This policy is outlined. We've talked about it. Teams may draft non-user players if they wish. They do not have to draft user players, although this is encouraged. Undrafted user players are relegated to 4.10 non-user free agency period. A team can only forfeit a draft pick if they have filled their roster already, or if they would rather have a user player who has not yet found a home. At this point, let's get to it. The revised off-season schedule, because it has everything to do with how user free agency and the rookie draft are intertwined in this busy May of the SFL off-season. Here is the revised calendar. So tomorrow, contract negotiations will begin. Teams must re-sign user players, or user players must elect free agency during this time. Any non-user player does not have to be cut or signed at this time. The does not have to be cut is a revision. Cuts, amnesty cuts were going to come at this time in the season, but we have pushed that back. And if you go down to June 4th, when position changes, abilities, and final contracts are due, this is when all non-user player cuts must be made. And we'll go to, I want to take your attention to Saturday, May 14th. Teams can have a max of 14 players on their roster, starting with free agency decisions through the final contracts due period, and it must be cut back down to 12 once final contracts from the rookie draft are due on June 4th. So to further explain why cuts don't have to come until later, or why that's valuable or important. If you're a user free agent out there, we understand that it's hard to make a decision on whether you should re-sign or enter into free agency when you're not sure that a team wants or has a need for you. That's a very hard decision to make. On the flip side, it's a very hard decision for teams to make when choosing to cut or re-sign specific players, because they don't know who is going to be out there in free agency. Someone may want to cut a non-user player and fill that spot with a user player, but if they don't know what free agents are available, then they can't make an educated decision on making that cut. So we've moved the cuts. We've moved the cuts down to June 4th. So if a team wants to cut a non-user player because they have a user player in their place, they can now educationally do that. They've gone through user players free agency. They've gone through the rookie draft. They now have a player that they can put in place of that non-user player, and they can safely cut them at that time. So we're trying to, and with the added roster spots, now if a player decides to enter into free agency, any team can sign that player, because even though they even if they have 12 players under contract, they still have extra spots, 2 extra slots to sort of go over while they are still weighing their decisions on who they're going to use their amnesty cuts on. And I apologize, we haven't gotten to amnesty cuts in the rule book, but let's get to that right now here. In 4.8, a team may cut a player at any time for any reason. A team will suffer a penalty of half the remaining salary applied on a per-season basis during only the spring 16 off-season, which is what we're in. Any 2 players from the gold or silver tiers, or 1 from each tier, may be cut without penalty. And that's what we're talking about. That's the amnesty cuts just for this off-season, and that does not have to occur until June 4th. It's all part of that position changes, abilities, final contracts due period between May 30th and June 4th. So just in summary, teams should not fear. User players should not fear. Everyone has open roster spots. Everyone teams have not made decisions on what players to cut. They may take you on your team when they weren't originally looking for a free agent in that spot, because they don't have to make that cut early. They can make that cut later. They can make that decision later once they have sort of weighed their options in free agency and the rookie draft. So that's something new that was just put in. It was not part of owners' meetings. It was done by me as part of the schedule maker for the off season, because it just didn't make sense to have teams and players be forced to make decisions blind, putting faith in, oh, a team will have a spot for me, or oh, this player will be in free agency. We just didn't want to. We needed people to act in a way that they could act freely and feel like they wouldn't be punished for any one decision. So that has now been put in place, which has adjusted the off-season schedule a bit. So results of negotiations is still going to be next week. So Tuesday, May 10th, following the negotiations, this is a new date on the calendar. User undrafted info will be delivered to teams, and the free agent list will be finalized. Teams can begin discussions with rookies in private messages on May 10th and prepare their strategy for the upcoming free agency period. Teams will receive a list of rookies who listed their team as an interest and their information. So this is how we are going to go through the rookie draft. We had user players fill out their information, and they filled out what teams they want to play for, what positions they would play at, how active they plan to be on the strategy side. Do they ever want to be a coach someday? We got their name, and we've got their username on Slack. So basically, if a player, if 12 players said they want to play for Carolina, or one of the teams that they would like to play for is Carolina, then Carolina's team channel, private team channel, will receive the information on those 12 players. From that point, they can freely engage those 12 players to see what best fits with their strategy and how they want to approach the rookie draft, and they'll be able to reach out to those players. Obviously, these are all unofficial talks because nothing is official until that pick comes in on draft night and those teams make those selections. But what it allows teams to do is it allows teams to see a list of rookies who want to play on their team at the same time as the list of free agents that are user free agents that are available on the open market. So during user players free agency, May 14th through May 20th, teams will know not only who's in the free agent pool, but also who is a part of that rookie draft pool as well. Um, uh, a team like the Houston Texans looked at the rookie draft in the NFL and said, this is not a good group of quarterbacks. I don't think that we don't want to spend a first rounder on a quarterback. We don't think that a first round quarterback can turn around our franchise and make us a better franchise. So because we have that information, we're now going to go instead out and get a free agency at this position. And other teams, like Denver, approached it differently. We looked at the free agency pool. We didn't really like anything that we saw out there, but we know who's in the draft. We're going to get a quarterback in the draft, and we're going to do that because we have the information on the free agents and the possibilities that are out there for us during that period of the offseason. So it works in a similar way, and that's why teams will have access to the free agency list and the rookie draft list of players who are interested in joining their team. So that all happens in 8 days. So May 14th through May 20th, it's still the same user player free agency period, one contract per day. But again, teams can have a max of 14 players on their roster, starting with free agency signings. And through the final contracts due period, then we have the free agency decisions show, then we have the rookie draft show, and then we finally get to June 4th. All non-user player cuts must be made, and rosters, and by non-user player cuts, we mean the amnesty cuts, and rosters must be cut back down to 12 players within the salary cap by this date. Then I have my vacation, June 5th through the 10th. The results of the final contracts will be June 13th. We did a similar show last year where we showed basically who all had been signed to the team up to that point. Then June 14th through June 19th is the last wave of signings. Anyone that has any available spots left open will pick them up in the non-user free agency period. If a user player comes in after the rookie draft cutoff date, which is June or May 23rd is the cutoff date for a rookie being a part of this year's draft. Then they would be thrown into this non-user free agency period to be able to be picked up there, and the non-user free agency decision show would air on June 20th. So those are the big events. We'll finish up with the rule book just because we've gotten this far already. So we go down to ability changes, 4.7. Teams can change 2 total abilities on their roster during each offseason. This refers strictly to changing one ability to another, not adding or subtracting. Teams may only change one ability per player and may only change the abilities of a player if he has more than one ability. Players with only one ability are defined by that ability, and it may not be changed. Let's fix that. 4.8 cuts we've already been over. So player finalizations, that this goes to that June 4th deadline. Rookies' height, weight, equipment, and yearly salary must be turned in prior to non-user player free agency. So the league can finalize the majority of all contracts across all 16 teams. This also allows the majority of hex work to be done weeks in advance of season start. So Section 4.10, non-user players free agency, the final segment of the roster portion, which will allow teams to fill out their rosters with non-user free agents, with user free agents who did not accept a contract, or with user players who became active following the draft list cutoff. Teams will send a sheet to the commissioner outlining their free agency priorities. The commissioner will then decide who gets which free agent based on these preferences. All remaining players will accept the best contract offered when all priority sheets are in. The commissioner will spell out any additional details of this process as needed. It's all the same as it was last year. The results of this free agency phase will be reported in a special broadcast. At the end of the process, each team must have 3 golds, 4 silvers, and 5 bronzes signed to the roster. And that is the end of the offseason process, at least with contracts. And it's a lot. I know it's a lot, but as we take a deep breath, all of those nuances and all of those added options for teams, for players, it's all to personalize and customize your experience. It's all to allow you to be more flexible with the team that you want to put on the field that season. We all know that a significant amount of success is based on exposing your opponent's weaknesses and your scheme overall within the playbook. It's not, it's not all about abilities. It's not all about how you structure your contracts. All of that stuff is meant for the customization freak who wants it all, who wants that full experience of being an owner, of being a general manager, of being a coach. Um, that's all there for you. That's what the off season is all about, and that's why we have it. And also, we have all of that to mix things up. It creates off-season storylines. It creates dramatic returns. Um, interesting rivalries. It does a lot for the league. So it's certainly important. And so the owners this off-season have really spent their time in the BOD of adapting the off season to the user player element. We really want to welcome user players into our community, and we really want you to get just as involved as owners and coaches currently are. We just like to have a lot of fun around here, and so we want to make that as realistic as possible for everybody. So just in case you don't know the regular season rules, not much has changed here. In fact, I'm not sure that anything has changed here because the regular season rules are pretty darn good. 5.1 Playbooks and roster settings. Owners and coaches can have a minimum of 75 and a maximum of 150 offensive plays in their playbook at the start and throughout the season. There are no restrictions or requirements on number of formations, on how many plays there are in each formation. At least 25% of plays in each playbook must be a run to the halfback or fullback, and 25% of plays in each playbook must be passing plays. Trick plays and plays that the computer is proven not to run are not allowed. Owners and coaches can have a minimum of 35 and a maximum of 80 defensive plays in their playbook at the start of and throughout the season. Owners, coaches must supply initial non-star settings as well as offensive, defensive, and no-huddle audibles at the start of the season. All playbooks and audibles must be provided to the league office before the start of the preseason. They must be sent as either documents or images. Weekly adjustments. Owners and coaches can drop 20 and add 20 offensive plays per week and can drop 20 and add 20 defensive plays per week max. There are no limitations on audible and no huddle adjustments from week to week. And I must say, we had such controversy with this. You do not have to drop the same amount of plays as you add. You just have to stay within the 75 to 150 and 35 to 80 playbook restrictions. You can drop 5 and add 20 as long as you stay within 75, 150, and 35, 80, the numbers that are mentioned above. You do not have to drop 7, add 7, drop 14, add 14, drop 20, add 20. It does not have to be the same. 5.3 Injuries. Due to the limited depth chart control, limited 42-man rosters, and the impossibility of in-season roster adjusting, injuries are turned on in the SFL but are limited to in-game injuries. Long-term injuries reported will not count towards future games. 5.4 In-season transactions. Due to the impossibility of in-season roster adjusting and DAX stats transaction limitations, in-season roster moves and in-season trades are not allowed. All uniforms worn during the season must be submitted before the season begins. Teams are currently allowed 1 primary uniform and 4 alternate uniforms. Only one of the alternate uniforms can have colors that are not included in the team's primary color scheme. This rule This rule and all other rules regarding equipment and uniforms are subject to change at the discretion of the commissioner without requiring a vote from the owners. Teams must notify the commissioner which uniform they want to wear when submitting playbook changes for that given week. That is the rule book, folks. 1 hour, 9 minutes. And we went over, we revised the off-season schedule. We did an FAQ for what's going to be happening this week. What are your options? We're going to cut those videos out for you, those specific moments that were important, the FAQ about what's happening this week, and the revised off-season schedule, so you guys can take a look at that. We'll actually have those images available for you on our website outside of the video, or available on Slack, I should say, outside of the video. So we're going to get all that, we've got all that posted now on the site, and we will be, I will be available to answer any and all questions that roll through. There will be plenty throughout this week, I'm sure. As far as teams contacting user players, any user player that's currently on your team, they should be in your group. If you are not in your team's group, the team that you played for last season, please let me know so I can get you into that group so that you can begin negotiating your contract. All negotiations begin with market value. If your contract is up, if you're looking for a new deal, anything like that, you have to look at market value to see what type of deals that you can negotiate with your owners, with your players. That's where it all begins, and the market values are posted in the off-season business section, as will this video and the revised off-season schedule and the contract negotiations FAQ. It's been a long video. I hope that you paused, took a break, something through it, because it's a lot. But trust me, we needed to be more in depth with this rule book. We got more in depth. We needed rules to help our user players out, help them adapt to the SFL, and help teams be more flexible because of the influx of user players and the continuing influx of user players that we will have. That mission has been accomplished. It's been one of the most successful owner meetings in SFL history. In fact, it may be the most successful for all that got done in just 7 days. I want to take my hat off to the BOD, Thomas Paternitti, Michael Irvine, Ronnie Nickens, and Stephen Mullinex for working so hard. And I want to take my hats off to the owners, their passion, their input, their dedication in what passed and what failed. We didn't break down specific votes, but owners have the specific voting results that they can share with anyone who is interested. We have links to those results as well in case anyone wants to take a peek. So tremendous job, tremendous effort by everyone involved this week. It's done. The hardest part of the off season is done. And tomorrow begins season 7 in getting prepared to win a championship. Hope everyone is having a blast, and the best is just beginning. I am your commissioner, Cameron Irvine. Apologize if things have gotten more confusing for you or more difficult for you. That is not the intention. Our intention is to provide the best simulation football product ever, and I am confident no one has ever come close to what we have accomplished here. Thank you so much. Have a great night. And the SFL off-season is officially ramped up.